nose. Welcome everyone to another episode of Wednesday Night Live with Simon Jacobson. Class titled Finding by Not Seeking. One of the physicists of the previous century used a very appropriate analogy which I'd like to borrow in our conversation here, and he came to explain a phenomenon. Today we know that all matter is made up of particles, elements which are in turn made up of molecules, which in turn are made up of atoms, which in turn consists of subatomic particles. However, nobody's ever seen an atom, definitely not a subatomic particle, a quark, an electron, a neutron, a proton. And because there were so many different bizarre conclusions that scientists discovered in the 20s and 30s, last 20th century, about the subatomic world, so there were the skeptics that asked the question, how do you come to all these conclusions about matters that no one has ever seen? Not even under a microscope. And he gave a wonderful analogy of a fisherman who spread his net over the seas and began to gather all types of species of fish. And he began to document the different types of fish, the color, the shapes, the sizes, the different species. After all his research and examination, he came to a conclusion, and the conclusion was that there are no fish in the sea that are shorter than a half-inch long. And he was about to announce this revelation when his child or somebody made him aware that, let's look at the net you're using. And they looked at the net. The net consisted of spaces between the ropes that were half-inch. So all the fish that were half-inch or shorter fell back into the sea. So his conclusion was correct, but with one important qualification and caveat, and that is that when you use a net that has spaces of 1 half-inch long and wide, you're never going to catch fish that are shorter than a half-inch long. Obviously, you don't need a scientist to know that. This was his analogy to try to explain that you need to know what tools you use before you come to a conclusion. So if someone were to say, I don't see love with my eyes, the answer is your physical eyes are not containers, are not instruments that can see love. Love needs different type of instruments. And this is a critical lesson in life about so many matters that sometimes we don't experience something, or something remains elusive to us, difficult to access. Not necessarily because it's not there, but perhaps the tools we're using and the methods and attitudes we take don't allow us to experience it. And this is true about many, many matters in life, which I shall address hopefully in this class. How do you find the right tools to match the things you want to have in life? So the interesting phenomenon is this. The more real, the more important, the more fundamental, I could say even the more permanent something is in life, the more complicated are the tools you need to access it. The simpler the things, the more shallow, the more superficial and temporary, the easier it is to access. It's a simple example. Take any commodity. You need a loaf of bread. You go to a store, to a bakery, and you buy a loaf of bread. You need a different product. You find a place where that product is sold, and you get it. Even if it's an exotic product, a difficult one to find, so you have to search longer. Today, in our modern technological age, it's far easier to find almost anything at any time. The same thing is with other needs. You need to buy a home, you look up, you find a broker, you look at advertisements, you need to find shelter, clothing or food. There's other ways to find that. You need to find a job. You put an advertisement in the newspaper, you network, you go out and get it. These are the conventional ways that we're trained to. You need something, you find who has it and what the price they want for it, and you go and you acquire it. These things are easier relatively. When it comes to something like, as I mentioned, love, or the search for truth, or the search for inner peace, harmony, the search for God, the search for soul, any of those type of experiences, transcendence, there's no store, there's no supermarket. You can just go to a shelf and say, listen, hey, sell me some love, sell me some transcendence, sell me some truth. Because these commodities are actually not commodities. They're items that don't lend themselves to those type of tools. You want to knock on a nail, you use a hammer. You can't use a hammer to persuade someone to do something. You want to catch a butterfly, you use a net, a butterfly net. If you want to catch love, you want to find love, you can't use a net. You can't just go around with a net. Because like the example I gave earlier was that there's some things that defy certain instruments, and you need different instruments. I would suggest that many of our frustrations and our anxieties and stresses over finding certain things in life are a result of our using the wrong tools. And we try to use tools that work in one area for another paradigm, and they're not appropriate tools. You need to find the tool that fits the thing you're looking for. And this is a theme that I believe that a person assesses what they're looking for, understands what kind of personality and what kind of entity it is, and then identifies what tools come to access it that can change a tremendous amount of things in life. One of the biggest things that eludes people is finding a soulmate. Finding someone that you can live your life with the rest of your life. You could trust, that has adventure to them, someone that is kind, someone that has all the qualities that we'd like to have, someone that nurturing, and so on. It's one of the things that are missing so many people's lives. In New York especially, I don't know if it's especially, but New York has a large population, is a mecca of singles. Love is one of those elusive things. And people, and everybody has all kinds of advice to do this, to do that. You have best-selling books that talk about how to love, how to find love. And it remains one of the great pains of our generation, of people who grow older and they don't seem to find the right person. So you could just dismiss it as being, okay, some people are lucky, some are not. Or maybe we're doing something wrong. Maybe the way we're looking for it, the methods we use. Remember, at the end of the day, who teaches us what tools and what methods to use? What we pick it up first in our homes, then in our schools, then in the media, and then society at large. But what happens if those that taught it to us themselves have flawed tools, or they did not know how to access these things? So we're left with a very weak repertoire, a very weak arsenal of tools when it comes to matters that I just described. We'll call them the more ethereal. Just to give an example of in another area that I've discussed many times, just to drive the point home. Another similar paradox. Here's the paradox. When it comes to talk about shallow and superficial things, you can go on and have a whole day you can talk about it. Gossip, sports, the weather, things that are not very significant, people can talk and talk. Just listen to talk radio. When it comes to talk about yourself, your intimate self, the most deepest part of yourself, you find very few words. Even with the people you trust. It's not just because we don't trust. Why is that? Why, when something is so close to your heart, the love you want in your life, the feelings you have about things, those intimate elements that are part of you that you're so close to, we have so few words. When it comes to discussing things that are more superficial, we have many words. The answer is because words are containers. So think of a container, a cup. A cup can contain a certain amount of liquid. If the liquid is too much, the cup can't contain it. Words are limited containers, so they can contain, when it comes to more superficial, shallow things, they can talk, they're containers. When you want to talk about something more intense, more substantial, something more serious, the energy, so to speak, the intensity of that expression is too much for just regular words. That's why we've created a language called metaphor. We have a language called poetry, music, art, a language that broadens and widens the containers to allow us to express deeper feelings, deeper experiences. Sometimes even metaphor is not enough. Sometimes it's just a cry. Someone says, oy vey. Or so a different type of cry. Or a laugh. Can capture often what volumes of words cannot capture. Like they say a photograph is worth 1,000 words. Because a photo is a visual. A visual tells you a message that words simply are not enough. And you see this all the time. Sometimes you want to really say something to someone, you can't find the right words. And you need to express it in different ways. You can express it through a song, you can express it through a cry, you can express it through, take the language of love, language of an embrace, a hug, a kiss. These are languages that are far greater and far broader than just words. So you could say to someone, I love you. Or you could say to someone, not the word I love you, you could say to someone, embrace them, and then the expression of love is far deeper than any words. So basically it comes down to this, that the more intense, the more intimate, the less tangible something is, the more we need to go beyond the regular containers that we use. As we shall soon see, that there's a point of experience, real reality, that doesn't have any containers at all. Then of course the question is, so how can I contain it? How can you experience something if you don't have any tool? Well, we'll discuss that. We'll soon discover tools that are not really tools. Toolless tools, if you could put it that way. But the rule is that the deeper the experience, the more important it is, the less regular, conventional, tangible tools will work. So we have 5 senses. They're called sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell. Our eyes, our ears, our mouths, our ability to touch, and our noses to smell. What can we contain with 5 senses? So our 5 senses experience most of what we experience, the things we see, the sounds we hear, and the things we taste, touch, and smell. Sometimes those 5 senses can be stimulated by very powerful experiences, but they're still senses. So when you look at something, let's say you look at a beautiful sunset, or a white snow falling from the skies. Right? So your eyes are seeing a visual, but there's something far more than just the sunset. There's a certain beauty to it, a harmony, a sense of peace. The same thing is with other senses, that the senses have 2 sides to them. What they really contain on a very physical level is actually limited. But they can open up an experience that's far more than just the sensory. But if you think about it, the deepest things in life are not contained by the senses. If someone were to ask you, what would happen if you close your eyes and shut your ears and taste, touch, and smell? What would you be left with? If you close down all your 5 sensory tools, think about it. Try it out. Try it out at home. So initially, the reaction many people have is, I would just disappear. You wouldn't disappear, because you don't need eyes to see yourself. You don't need ears to hear yourself. You don't need taste, touch, and smell to experience yourself. You have a certain sense of self, even if all your senses are shut down. What are you sensing when you sense yourself? So if you look at yourself in the mirror, yes, then it's captured in a visual image. If you listen to your voice on a recording, you hear your sound. But what is it that you experience when your senses are not working? Most of our senses, I would say all of our senses, is really to interact with each other. We can see each other, we can hear each other, we can taste, touch, and smell each other. But to experience yourself without the senses is a far harder thing to describe. If someone said to you, what does it feel like to be alive? Very few words can describe it. If you don't know, if you've never been alive, you don't know what the word means, what could you say? What does it feel like to be alive? You're going to describe how you breathe, how your heart beats, how your senses are stimulated. Those are all not real descriptions of being alive. Those are expressions of life. They're parts of the story. But life is more than the sum of the parts. What does it feel like to be healthy? Actually, if it feels like anything, there's a problem. If you feel something, it means there's a problem. If you feel a dull sensation or a sharp sensation or any sensation, breathing, the heart beating, all your systems flowing should be seamless. Should not feel like anything. If there's a sensation, you know there's a problem. So, interestingly, the experience of life itself is really beyond sensation. Like if I were to ask you right now, in a second from now, what is your left leg doing? Until I didn't mention it, till you didn't think about it, you didn't even know what it was doing. It was just resting there. It was there, but you didn't have to sense it to know that it's there. Now, when you apply your mind, you think, where's my left leg? My left leg is crossed. My left leg is on the floor, whatever it may be. So you see an experience of something that does not have a defined sensation involved. It's just there. It's just being. But in life, we have two types of experiences. Things that is just a state of being, I am, and then there's a state of you experiencing something. So let's take, talking about love. Let's talk about love. Is love an experience or is it a state of being? So you could say it's both. There's the act, the verb called love. When you love somebody actively, you feel a surge in your heart. You feel an attraction. You feel your heart, your pulse beating. But then there's love as an experience, as a state of being, as instead of an experience. It's a state of being. I'm in love. It's a state of love. It's more of a noun than it is a verb. Some say for women love is a noun, and for men it's a verb. It's an action. For women it's a state of being. When you, for example, submerge yourself in water, underwater, so, there's a certain type of calm and peace that surrounds somebody when they submerge themselves. That type of peace is very hard to describe in a sensational form. It's not just you got wet. It's surrounded by something. When you understand something well with your mind, you can know a subject, and then you can become the subject. You become so one with the thing you're understanding that it's no longer a subject and an object. You are one with it. Like, for example, would you say a fish gets wet, water gets wet? No, water is a state of wetness. So there's also in our own experiences, when you're really immersed in something, you become so much one with it that it's no longer a duality of two experiences, you and what you're experiencing. Now, why am I saying this? Because it's vital to be able to appreciate these more elusive things in life, like love, and as I mentioned, soul and truth and harmony and peace and God and soul. You have to understand them as forces that you can only really experience as being one with them, as opposed to just experiencing as a superficial thing. For example, when you look at anything here in this room, you see the wall. Okay, the wall is not one with you. So you see a wall. It's a certain limited dimension, and that's that. But when you experience something that's inside of you, that you feel it completely becomes part of who you are, there's no object and no subject. They call it sometimes being in the zone. So I don't know if any of you have ever done any writing or art, or just very much immersed in a project where you can stay up all night and you don't even realize you're awake. You don't even realize you're tired. You don't even realize that you stayed up all night. You don't even realize you're hungry. Why? Because you become so much one with the experience, you don't even sense yourself. And then suddenly you realize. In sports or in art, sometimes they call being in the zone. Once you've trained yourself and conditioned yourself, you become so much one with the experience, there's no two things going on. Now, this is one of the most powerful and beautiful experiences in life, where you have no self-consciousness. You're just doing it. You just do it naturally, seamlessly, to the point you don't even feel it. Like I mentioned before about the life itself, the life force. If someone asks you, what does life feel like? What does being alive feel like? There's no sensation if it's healthy life. If you feel a sensation, it means immediately there's some problem. There's two things, that there's some tension, there's some stress, there's some conflict. When something is flowing seamlessly, let's say water is flowing seamlessly through a pipe, it's just a very seamless flow where you can't distinguish between the water and the pipe. The same thing in our own lives. For example, do you feel the blood rushing through your veins? If you feel your blood rushing through your veins, it's either you're running, or you're out of breath, or there's a problem. The blood rushes through our veins and does so constantly in a very seamless way. That's health. Health is a seamless experience where there's this subject and object have fused and melted into one. Any real, intimate, and true experience has that element of fusion. So it's interesting then. We have a very compartmentalized life in which we live. Most of our experiences are very much like a subject and an object. And those rare experiences in life that we experience completely one with, we become one with that experience. One example given for this in Jewish mysticism is the difference between someone doing a good act, like a mitzvah, and someone who's concentrating on an idea, When you begin to, you ever read a book and you just turn the pages, you don't even realize how many pages you've turned. Even though it's just a book with words on a paper, you become so immersed in the story that and it becomes so involved, your mind, your heart is so immersed in it, you don't even realize that you're reading a book. The writer has captivated your attention to the extent that you're feeling it as if it's happening. And then you step back and say, hey, all this was a book, I just read it. The same thing could be, obviously, with a movie or film or any other experience that so captures you that you don't feel yourself experiencing it, you feel yourself being it. So the mind is a perfect example for this, because the mind, when it comprehends an idea, it's not like the mind is one thing and the idea is elsewhere. Initially, it begins with an idea outside of you, but then once you become absorbed by it, absorbed in it, the mind becomes completely one with the experience itself. The Bible, for example, talks about a state of being when Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden and they did not even sense that they were naked. Similar to the consciousness of a newborn child. Newborn child doesn't have any sexual consciousness. When is someone conscious? When they feel either embarrassment, shame, something to cover, they feel them being looked at a certain way. Self-consciousness, in other words, is a state of duality, where you and your own body and your own experience are like two separate things. Children have this type of seamlessness. Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden had this type of seamlessness. But we live in a world that is corrupt, or a world that people exploit each other, and a world where you can't trust anyone. You lose that sense of fusion. And then becomes, you walk outside the street, you're right away looking, who's looking at me, which way. You have to put on different masks and faces and different garments for every given situation. The question is, do we have anywhere in this world, a place, even our own homes, where we feel completely comfortable, where you don't need to have any garments? I don't just mean in physical sense, I mean it metaphorically. You don't need to have any masks, any filters, you can just be yourself. Do you have anyone in this world that you can speak that way with? Most people will say no. And because we live in a world where we've been taught that you don't know whom you could trust, especially if our trust has been abused or violated, especially at a young age. We walk around with a lot of defense mechanisms, some of us more sophisticated than others. We have many layers of armor, and we're always protecting. We protect ourselves because we don't want to be exploited, we don't want to be used, we don't want to be hurt. And it's understandable. However, what the price you pay for that is that you have so many layers and barriers that you may never find someone you could just fuse with. So conceptually, anytime I tell this to someone, everybody would love to be able to have someone in this world, some place, some person they could just be completely one with. We don't have to have any of these layers and any of these filters and so on. We all would love to have some type of experience like that. But as children, we have that experience. We assume that. That's why children are very vulnerable. And children are able to, children have total trust until they're hurt. And some psychologists put it this way, that we're all looking to find that inner child, once again, to find that ability to just trust unconditionally. But once you've been hurt, and once you've been some way violated or abused, it's not that easy to just let down your guard. So then you have to ask yourself the question, do I really know who I am? Or am I a product of all these defense mechanisms and all these layers and layers and masks and faces? At some point, you put on so many masks, you can't even know whether you're wearing a mask. Sometimes the mask becomes your reality. I mean, psychologically speaking, very much part of our own healing in any given situation is trying to distinguish between who you think you are and who you really are. And it may sound ridiculous, but most of us don't know who we really are, because let's just define that. You begin your life like all of us begin in our mother's womb. Okay? There, you're completely nurtured, protected, no matter what kind of mother you have. There's a certain natural biological process that a mother nurtures a child. Now, of course, even pregnancy, even mothers who are abusive to themselves or ingest things that are dangerous, destructive, can affect the child. But let's assume in pregnancy, even the most dysfunctional mother can't really hurt their child. Okay? I can't say that across the board, but then a child emerges into this world. It all depends what kind of home they have. If it's a home that's nurturing and validating and reinforcing, so the child learns to be comfortable with themselves, he or her, and learns to build up confidence, self-esteem, and their exploration of the universe is continuously validated. So as they grow into an adult, they feel very secure and confident. In the best case scenario, I don't know if there's a reality of a best case scenario, but let's just for argument's sake, theoretically, the best case scenario, parents, the father and mother completely dedicated to their child. There's no absenteeism, no abuse, constant love and validation, obviously with the necessary discipline as well. A child like that is going to be an extremely secure child and be able to take on any challenge. Just to use an example, imagine a bird doesn't have its early formative years, doesn't have a nest, doesn't have a nurturing nest. It will never get the courage to fly. So the early stages and formative years of a child are all about nurturing. It's all about receiving a nurturing environment, a validation, and so on. Take the other extreme, the worst possible extreme. I'm only using extremes just to make the point. Obviously, in most situations, it's somewhere in between. The other extreme would be a child that is unwanted, a child that's given away, a child that has no clue who its parents are, or a broken family, or parents who are abusive, or parents who are absentee. There's of course, real worst case scenarios, terrible abuse, and then there's more mild forms of it. A child that's yelled at. Every time the child expresses itself, the parent silences the child. Parents who are insecure and they project that insecurity and cause the children to become just puppets and just to play along, to just satisfy and let the parents indulge in their own needs. I mean, what I'm saying here may sound like a nightmare, but unfortunately, it's more common than not than what I just described. Again, all variations and different extremes. What happens to this child? Now, it's very hard to document because nobody has ever really been in a situation where you can literally gauge from day one what happens to the child. But it's pretty obvious that a child that is silenced, invalidated, yelled at, and in many ways will suddenly become a different type of person. You hear a child may be bubbly and all excited about something, but they know when their mother hears that the mother always is angry, the child will become much more reserved and will silence themselves. Not once. You need to have repeated time. And suddenly, this bubbly, enchanted child, it becomes this withdrawn, repressive, and so on. Just as an example, the anger of a parent, the disappointment of a parent, these things will leave tremendous impact on the child's psyche. Now, why God made it that way, why a child should be so vulnerable is a whole other discussion. But maybe it's the other way around. He wanted to teach us as parents the great responsibility we have to shape the gift we were given. Now, this does not mean, just for the record, even though it's not the discussion in this class, that someone growing up in such a hurtful or destructive environment, there's no hope. There's no such thing as damaged goods. Jewish thought talks much about a soul always remains intact, but the challenge is far greater. Think of it like having a healthy heart, but all the arteries and all the channels have been polluted. So the heart is still intact, the soul is still intact, but now you have to compensate for all those years of whatever damage was done. So it's not that it's hopeless, it's just more difficult. Frederick Douglass put it this way, he said that, I think I mentioned that to you, right? That it's much easier, far infinitely easier, to bring up a healthy child than to fix a broken adult. For the simple reason, to use an analogy that is brought in some Jewish sources, think of a child as a warm ball of wax. The psyche is a warm ball of wax. Every impression, every experience leaves a scar. And wax hardens, just like our arteries harden, and just like our attitudes harden, just like our personalities harden, so do these impressions harden. And suddenly now you're a hard ball of wax, 20, 30, 40, 50 years old, whatever it is, with all those impressions. Far, far more difficult at that point, because you can't just go ahead and melt the wax again. And if you do, there's also side effects. So that's just an analogy. Another analogy given is like a seed. You plant the seed in the ground, and someone comes over and just makes a small, slight scratch on the seed. Almost like a hair, what do you call it, a hairline. So you think it's nothing, but it's a seed. the seed grows into a tree, you could have a big gnash on the tree, or the tree may never even emerge. Because in the seed level, everything is so concentrated. What do they say? The Jigan was one of the great Jewish linguists, Yiddish, and comedians. So he spoke about the Jewish theory of relativity. And Einstein was also Jewish, but another version of it, he said, was 3 hairs. What did he say? 3 hairs on your head isn't much, but 3 hairs in the soup, that's called relativity. So I should know. So everything is relative. You have a piece of dust on your finger, it's almost insignificant. Piece of dust on your eyeball, the same piece of dust, suddenly becomes a major irritant. Because it's all context, it's all contrast. The eyeball is a very sensitive area, and therefore a piece of dust is going to be a major nuisance. I don't know, natural pearls. You know how natural pearls are formed? They're formed by an oyster who has a piece of dust, dust. The oyster's inner skin, inner belly, is very, very tender, very, very sensitive. When a piece of dust enters there, it's like on the eyeball. What does the oyster do? It secretes a fluid that hardens around the dust, and therefore protects the skin, its membrane, from the dust. So actually, natural pearls, which we consider things of beauty, are basically all built around a piece of dust. That's interesting. Porcupines, they say, have the softest underbellies of all creatures. And what does it need? It needs these sharpest needles. Just a lesson in life. Sometimes when you see someone that has, they say in Israel, sabras, they're prickly on the outside, but very soft on the inside. So sometimes when you see someone that's very tough on the outside, it could be they're protecting a very soft interior. It's not always the rule, but sometimes. The point I want to make is that when it comes to children are that type of softness, and they will be shaped by the attitudes around them, for good and for bad, which on one hand can be a beautiful thing, on the other hand we can see great tragedy come out of that when it's misused or abused. The point being that when we become adults, you ask the question, who are you? It's a very difficult question to answer. Who am I? And maybe I'm a product of the expectations and attitudes that others wanted of me. Some of us are pleasers, some of us are bitter, some of us are rebellious. Is that who you naturally are, or that's what you developed as a result of your environment and conditioning, and maybe it's all acquired? Very hard to distinguish between what you are by nature and what by nurture. And we also know that today that even nurture rewires your nature as well. So it's not just a matter of identifying the distinction. Now, is it critical to get to the bottom of it? Look, we may never get to the bottom of knowing everything that makes us tick. But let's put it this way, if there's a problem in our lives, it's sure going to be very difficult if you can't get to some understanding. Some people, for example, are their own worst enemies. I wouldn't say some people, all of us are our own worst enemies, I should add. So people have difficulty finding a trusting relationship. So it's very easy to find scapegoats and blame it on the other, and blame it on the guys or on the girls, or blame it on our parents, or blame it on the system, or blame it on television, or whatever. But at the end of the day, if you're an adult, you got to take responsibility for your life. You got to figure out what about you? Is there anything that you are contributing to this? How much are you projecting? What kind of expectations do you have? In relationships, it takes two to tango. So understanding yourself is critical. I don't think I have to make a case for know thyself, but it's very critical, especially when there's a problem. When things are riding smoothly, even then, a wise person anticipates and wants to understand themselves better, because the better you know, the better you understand, the more you can cope with different situations as they come your way. But when there's trouble, there's no question that we have only one place to turn, which is to look at what our tools are like. And our tools often are very weak. They're based on what was given to us, or what we developed on our own to protect ourselves from a hostile world. And that brings me back to what I was discussing before, this distinction between how we experience things. So number one challenge is this, as I mentioned before, the rule. The more ethereal the experience, you rest assured you need to have more ethereal tools. I know that doesn't sound, it sounds pretty simple. But the fact of the matter is you cannot go and find love like you find a loaf of bread. The things that are sensory in this world, sensory experiences, you experience with your sensory tools. Things that are supersensory, that are not tangible, that are, as I said, ethereal, transcendent. You must have transcendent tools. But time and again, what we keep on doing is bumping our heads into the wall by trying to use a hammer to persuade somebody. It doesn't work. A hammer is good for knocking in a nail. To try to persuade somebody with a hammer, the tool doesn't fit, as I discussed earlier at length. So the tool has to fit the thing you want to gain. And when it comes to as I said, the more ethereal things in life, the ones that are more permanent and the ones that are most fundamental, not shallow things. Shallow and temporary things relatively need shallow and temporary tools. The things that are enduring, and I'll list just some of them: love, inner peace, truth, God, soul, transcendence. It's a pretty good list. Basically, all the needs we have to be happy people, happiness for that matter, joy. These are all non-tangible needs, but they are what make us really shape who we truly are. Because you can have all the others. I mentioned last week, and I mention it again. Some people say, just give me enough money and I'll be a happy person. So then why don't you go study people who have money? Then the formula should stay. The more money they have, the happier they should be. Some argue it's exactly the opposite. Because money gives the illusion that you can buy everything, but that doesn't make you a happy person. You could be a person who has no money and be a very happy person. You could be a person with a lot of money and be very miserable. And no one has ever done a study that the wealthier people are, generally speaking, it's a happier group. Not at all. The more functional they are, the more love there is, the healthier homes there are. On the contrary, if you're a person who's corrupt or don't have a sense of direction, given more tools, you'll probably be more corrupt because you have even more things. Look, the Nazis are always a case in point. A very sophisticated culture, not considered a third world country, developed and gave us some of the best of science and medicine and philosophy and art and poetry and you name it. Under certain circumstances, suddenly turned into beasts that were worse than any primitive culture ever lived. And they used all their sophistication to be destructive. So it's not what you have, it's what you do with it and what your sense of your moral senses. So all these forces I just mentioned, the ones that you cannot touch, you immediately know that you cannot use tools that touch. So love is something you cannot touch. So what tool experiences love? For example, so I described before, and going back to the two types of experiences we have. One is most of the things we experience is sensory stimulation. It's so overwhelming we don't even know how much we're trapped by sensory stimulation. The things we see, we hear, we taste, touch, and smell. That's our 99% of our lives are consumed with that. The part of our sense, which are part of our lives that is beyond the senses, is something that is far more rare, and we have far less time for it. They say in the Western world, by the time we're age 20, the average Westerner, meaning us, has seen 1 million advertisements. Seen 1 million advertisements. That's a lot of extraterraneous material, you can say. That means your mind has been stimulated and has been exposed to 1 million different type of products. Maybe the same product many times. That has to leave an impression, because this advertising is made to sell something to us. Now, you can't be left happy because no one has bought 1 million products by the time they're age 20. You know anybody that has? Okay. And it's all selling us beautiful faces and beautiful places and beautiful objects and cars and sexiness and the whole works. So this is not a fire brimstone attack on modern marketing and modern technology, modern commerce and so on. But it's an observation to know what we're exposed to. We're inundated. If you know all this, that's even overt. And what about the subliminal messages in a supermarket? You walk down the street. Just look at that window across the street. You know how much psychological wisdom goes in that, in creating that? That's not some accident. Millions of dollars are spent to create something like that. The colors, the lighting, to get our attention. For what? To make a sale. Now, I'm not saying you can say, so what? It's innocuous. It doesn't hurt us. I agree. No damage done. But yes, if you don't have an impression inside yourself of what you are, you're going to start becoming a sum of the parts of what you see. I've described, I think, in the past, I remember once sitting with my brother, and he had his little baby boy who was maybe 10 months old, maybe around a year, in the room. was my office. The baby was making a mess. My office was full of paper, so baby loved paper. Paper was all over the place. My brother kept trying to control him. I said, no, it's kind of cute. I like it, actually. Let him just be. He's going to have plenty of people trying to control him. Let him have free abandon. And he turned over my whole office, which actually was an excuse for me to throw out a lot of unnecessary paper. And then, I don't know, it was by accident or something, I turned on the monitor, television. So he had the screen. And suddenly this child, who for the last half hour was just completely active, turning the whole place upside down, suddenly froze in his tracks, 10-month-old boy, and just stared at the screen. I remember it was so chilling that my brother said, shut it off, because it looked like the child died. I'm talking about mentally. Because suddenly all movement stopped. He was frozen and just staring at the screen. I remember this. Maybe for 30 seconds. Then I shut it off. The child waited another 15 seconds, still staring at the screen. Maybe, the image was there still, or thinking it's going to come back. And I remember said to myself, imagine being exposed to that, not 30 seconds, not 30 minutes, not 30 hours. Let's not even talk about the cumulative hours And again, I hope nobody gets the wrong impression, especially since you're here for the first time, that I'm coming to attack everything that's modern about our society. But I want to just point this out, that it's what kind of impression does that leave on the child? How could a child like that even be really thinking on their own? And again, it's nothing. I'm not even talking about what kind of programming they watch. Let's say it's Sesame Street, all 24/7. But bottom line is stimulation coming from outside, living vicariously through the characters on the screen, and so on. An impressionable mind that is being shaped by this. I don't see how anybody can have a fighting chance to figure out who they are when they have so many images telling us all kinds of stuff. So now we're dealing with an adult who's been shaped by all the above and trying to figure out, what does my voice have to say? What does your voice have to say? Your voice hasn't probably been heard in 25 years. And when it was heard, especially even a home that silenced it, even that wasn't allowed. So you can imagine what kind of mess many of us are in. I know it sounds like bad news, but there's good news coming. Okay? Because it's important to know, as the Jewish sages say, Yediyas HaMachal, knowing the problem is half the cure. If you don't identify an issue, you're definitely not going to get anywhere. And it's important to know how impressionable we are as children, because everything shapes that warm ball of wax. And the tools we develop as a result are, number one, not so natural to us, and number two, are very material type of tools. Especially in our high-tech age, we've been trained. You want to find something, go to Google, search, press a few buttons, and it'll be delivered within a day or two. Almost anything. You can access anything, anytime, anywhere. So then, now comes all the search for truth, for God, for soul, for love, for harmony, for peace. And which button are you going to press? And which television show is going to do it for you? So suddenly we're left almost bereft of which tools. No one ever taught us how to use tools like that. So if you're lucky and you grew up in a home where your parents were role models, and they loved each other, and they helped validate you, then you have that's the tools you have. What happens if you didn't have that? Or you had a limited version of that? Then what? What happens to children whose lives were torn apart early on due to a divorce, due to other tragedy, due to trauma? So we live in a world which is very challenging. So when it comes to this issue of the tools, that's why it's so vital, and that's why I decided to talk about it very directly. We have to develop completely new tools. And the good news is the tools you have them. You just maybe have never exercised them. It's like muscles that have never been exercised. So in this week's portion we have a verse, that's actually an episode, a few verses, that describe a new tool that most of us probably have never heard before. But you'll see it resonates. You may not have heard it quite in these words. And that's a tool that is very different than all other tools. As I said before, we're trained in this world. You want to get something? Find out what it is you want, and then find the shortest route from here to there to get it. As I mentioned before, loaf of bread, we know they have bakeries, we have supermarkets, we have stores. You want to deliver it, there's ways to get that too. You want to find a job, you need to network, you need to advertise, and so on. Almost everything in life, you have to be a go-getter. That's what we're told. But as I mentioned, all the real things in life, anything that's permanent, that's fundamental, this rule doesn't apply. You're a go-getter? Okay, find me a soulmate if you're such a go-getter. The same go-getter in everything else in life. When it comes to a soulmate, it's not so simple. What are you supposed to do? You can go on J-Date and sit on there all day. You can date people, you can network and so on, and sometimes just doesn't work. You may even meet the person that is your potential soulmate, and you have all kinds of screwed up tools that you don't know how to relate to them. You don't know how to be vulnerable. You don't know how to commit. Your fears come into play, trust issues, intimacy issues. The list goes on. So suddenly all the tools we were trained in don't have any value here. And as I said, especially if you were shaped in homes that were not very nurturing, you start second-guessing yourself. So what happens in most relationships? They're very unbalanced relationships. Let's say you even find someone that you want to be with. So there's elements of control, because since you're not so comfortable just being vulnerable, so who's really in control? Do you really open up? And what happens when you feel threatened? The list goes on of what happens in relationships. So the question is, how is there a way out of this? Well, one way out of this is, besides praying to God and hoping to give you a blessing to just find what you need in your life, there's also things we can do. And that is, we must look at our tools anew, and we must look at love and all these more ethereal forces in life. And once you understand that they're not regular commodities that you can just go buy off a shelf or press a button, you find completely new ways to access them. The example I'm going back to that I mentioned earlier, the example, what does life feel like? Let's talk life itself. The closest thing to us is that we are alive. What does it mean to be alive? A Martian or someone that never was alive comes and interviews you, a hypothetical discussion. They ask you, tell me, what does it feel like to be alive? What are you going to say? You could talk, as I mentioned, you could say your heart beats, your mind is working, you have arms and legs, there's a whole bunch of functions going on. And then they'll listen, that's what's called being alive? You'll say, well, it's part of it. You'd say it's expressions of life. But what does it feel to be alive? The answer is, it doesn't feel like anything. As I mentioned before, if someone says that my feeling of being alive feels like something, they usually need a doctor. If you feel something, it's not a good sign. Health is not supposed to feel like anything. You wake up in the morning, you start feeling something, like your heart pounding, or a thought somewhere, or somewhere a dull sensation or sharp, there's a problem. That's not what you want. You actually don't want to feel anything. You want to just, you don't want to feel your lungs taking in air, or your veins bulging, or the blood rushing through your brain, through your lungs, through your veins, or your nerves, feeling your nerves. Because a feeling means that something is not seamless, something is not completely fused. Because health really, to use an expression from Kabbalistic terminology, is a seamlessness between energy and container. When blood rushes through the veins and the blood become so much one, you don't even know that it's happening. That's exactly how you want it to be. That doesn't mean there aren't veins. There are physical veins, and there's blood. And just like there's nerves, and there's other forces and systems at work. But a true smooth system is like when it's like singing, what do they call it? A smooth machine. Is that it's so smooth that you don't even tell what's happening. As soon as something you could tell, it's not a good sign. You hear a sound. Something slows down. It's supposed to be completely fused. This is a perfect model for what real love is about and what real experiences are like. They're not about two states of an object and a subject. They become fused as one, as I mentioned before, like being in the zone. You're involved in something that you're so immersed in, like a fish in water. A fish in water is just one, they become one. Does water get wet? Water is wetness. I mentioned before, is love a verb or a noun? Is it an experience, an action? Or is it a state of being? So some say for men it's a verb and action. And for women it's a state of being. The truth is, love in its full sense of the word is like being submerged in something that just you become one with. Not that you just experience and then you move on. Love is a 24/7 type of thing. Yes, it's true, there's an act of love, there's an expression of it. But that's a particular part of it. True love fills up a person in a way that they become completely one. The Talmud says that true intimacy is described as das. Adam knew Eve. Knew. The word knowledge is used for sexuality. Because knowing is considered total fusion. Two people know each other in the fullest sense of the word, where there's nothing that separates between them. Like the Bible also uses the expression, they become one flesh. Like one flesh. I mentioned before, how many people in this world can you say you're completely comfortable with to be completely vulnerable? Is there any space in this world that you feel that you could take off all your masks and all your layers and all your armor and all the the defense mechanisms that we have developed? That would be something to be able to be in a place or find a person that you could be that way. It's not common because we do live in a hostile world, and as I mentioned, we've developed all kinds of mechanisms to protect ourselves due to all the forces I mentioned before, the forces in our homes, in our schools, in our environments, on the media. We know we're not safe in this world. And therefore we have always exit strategies and all kinds of sophisticated tools to cope. So let's describe now what does a world look like, and what access, what tools, and what is experience of having true experience with of what real love is about, real inner peace. So let's talk about the experience of God. I have to add one big disclaimer always when I speak about God, because God has gotten such a bad rap, and there's so many stereotypes around God that whenever you mention it, everybody right away evokes in people their impression of what God is. I'm not talking about some guy in heaven that sits on a throne with a long white beard ready to strike us with lightning and all the negativity. Most people, if you do a type of free association, you say the word God, most people associate it with guilt, anger, punishment, vengeance, dogma, something like that. When I talk about God, I'm talking about reality. The inner reality of all of existence. If you were able to cut to the core and get rid of all the layers, the inner self, the inner soul of it all. I've mentioned this a number of times. I remember early years giving this class. It was before your time, Liana, even though you're from the veterans. So the group that came were people from the arts and entertainment industry. And many of them were Jewish, some were not. But I remember their backgrounds were very different than my own. Here I was sitting with a beard and a yarmulke, with a not as white a beard as it is today. And I remember, feeling always a certain, disconnect. Because I said to myself, look, a lot of these people, very spiritual, but many of them would say their spirituality came from Zen Buddhism or LSD. You've heard of this substance? And other such experiences. And here I was coming from, more traditional Jewish guy. Though those that know me know better, right? But so I remember I was at a disadvantage because I felt, even before I opened my mouth, who knows what kind of stereotype I'm evoking in people's minds. This person may think I may remind them of an angry grandfather that schlepped them to synagogue on Yom Kippur against their will, or irrelevant Hebrew school teacher that taught hollow bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah lessons, or maybe evoke even positive memories. So I tried an experiment. I decided I'm not going to use any reference to anything that has even a hint of religion. So I created my whole little language. Instead of God, I used the word the essence, or the reality, the essence of reality. Instead, if it was a more New Age type of group, I used words like undefined layers of unconscious energy or something like that. If it was instead of Torah, I used the word blueprint. Instead of mitzvahs, I used the word connections. Instead of Messiah, I used the word redemption. I used the word destination. So here I was pontificating about this journey to the essence of your inner reality, using these different connections, following a blueprint, a roadmap, and ultimately creating a fusion, reaching the destination of fusion between matter and spirit, matter and energy, where we're completely aligned, our inner and our outer, completely aligned in one seamless whole. This was the tone. And people were sitting and listening. I remember I really got their attention. They loved it. After a few weeks, a guy comes over to me and says to me, "Are you talking about God?" So I said, "Yes, but don't spoil it for the others." And this experiment really worked. I realized that in our age of communication, we call this a communication age, information age, And we're told, especially in therapy, that no one can guess your feelings. Communicate, break your silence, say what you're thinking. How's anyone going to know? So communication is true, is a necessary tool for connection. But communication can also be a very big separator, because words are loaded. I may use a word that to me is a meaningless word, and you may go ballistic when you hear it, because it reminds you every time your mother was angry, she used that word or whatever. So words are very loaded. The word God, 3-letter word, G-O-D, probably has more different of opinion what it means than any word in the dictionary. What does God mean? I mean, if we passed out, besides the prerequisites, supreme being, creator, first cause, whatever, what does it mean, God? And what does soul mean, for that matter? So there's an expression I use, I think, in the book Torah Meaningful Life. I bring the story with Levi Yitzchak Barditchev. He was a great Hasidic Rebbe, very wise and very sensitive and loving person. We could use more such rabbis. And he once was told, a self-proclaimed atheist, he said to him, the God you don't believe in, I also don't believe in. Think about that. The God you don't believe in, I also don't believe in. In other words, first we have to define what the word means before we disagree. So that's why I always have to give this disclaimer, because I want to say the word God, I want to say what I mean by it. Not some type of stereotypical Woody Allen caricature, but rather a God as the essence of existence, the essence of us. So how do you experience things on an essential level? A level that is not tangible and not accessible through the plain sensory tools. We could use the word transcendence is a very good word, I find, because transcendence is a very word that's not loaded. Most people can relate to it. Some of us experience transcendence through music and art, through poetry, through love, some through spirituality. Think of transcendence as it's the contrast to survival, existentialism. So we have survival, our survival needs, the needs for shelter, for food, for comfort, for clothing, the things we're most involved in most of the day, making a living, trying to make ends meet. And then there's our transcendental needs, which are by definition means they're not tangible. And this we experience either through literature, through reading, through conversations, through music, through art, through love. The list goes on. Transcendental needs, which is really what makes us unique and special, are completely different tools and different tool chests than the survival needs. Survival needs I discussed at length. Transcendental needs actually are counterintuitive tools that, as a matter of fact, the more aggressive you are, the less you get. So we're trained, as I said before, to be go-getters, go get something. You try to apply that to love, to God, to soul, to truth, to harmony, to inner peace. The list goes on. Aggressive tools actually are counterproductive. They will not achieve the purpose. As I said before, what does life look like, feel like? If you try to quantify it by the regular things that we feel like, here, this table right here is white, a white tablecloth. I'm using very tangible descriptions. I'll ask you, what does a soul look like? If you try to describe it with the same things we describe in the material world, you're actually defeating the purpose. The whole point is to come to try to experience something that that's not on your terms. And therein lies the challenge. We want even the transcendent things on our terms. And that's exactly what transcendence is about. That's not on your terms. It's about getting you out of your trap and your box. And for that, you need to be able to think outside of yourself. You're trying to fit it into you. This is one of the biggest, if I could identify a root of most problems in relationships. I mean, I'm identifying a very abstract root. Obviously, it manifests in many different ways. And that is people want control. They want love, but they want it on their terms. And love, by definition, is never on your terms, because you have another person involved. Another person means that's not based on your rules. Even if it's a great person, they're them and you're you. How do two people come together? So the Talmud says that the union of husband and wife is as difficult as parting the sea. Why? Because a male and female are like a water and land. I know there was a book called Venus and Mars, but let's call it water and land. But water and land are very different. So yes, there are very many commonalities between man and woman, But there are fundamental differences how they react to things. So how could two people love each other in a healthy way if they're all about me? By definition, love two people means they're two me's. So which one is going to win out? The answer is in a healthy love. I'm not talking about unhealthy love. You could have one person as an aggressor and the other one's just passive. So it works. So it's basically mutual dysfunctionality. It works. I don't know how long it can work, but it works. But when you talk about healthy love, the analogy given is that here's one person, here's another person, and they come together, and not one annihilates the other. So how does it work? I have my needs. The spouse has her needs. And how does one work without compromising? So some say, okay, that's called compromise. I have to give something up and blah, blah. But we know love is more than just compromise. People who really love each other don't see themselves compromising. The answer is they know how to go to a place that's beyond myself. They know how to transcend their needs. They realize life is not just about my needs. There are things that are higher than my needs. I know it sounds sacrilegious, but yeah, that's a revelation for some. In Hasidic language, it's called bittul. You realize there's something bigger than you. And it's very simple. It's just like you climb a mountain and you suddenly see, hey, there's a horizon that's bigger than me. It evokes a sense of awe. Is that so terrible? As a matter of fact, I would say that's very liberating. That's not all about you. People ask the question often, I've been asked this question many times, where does the soul go to after the person dies? Where does the soul go? Just think about the question a moment. Everyone asks that question, and especially a loved one. They were just here, now they're gone. All you're left is with the body. But if you think about it, the question, and a while back I realized that the question itself is based on a very narrow and I would say even arrogant premise. What's the premise? The premise is I am where it's at. So I want to know where a soul goes to. Maybe you're not where it's at. Who decided? Why is that an axiom? So let's consider an imaginary conversation between a refrigerator and electricity. I know this is going to sound really ridiculous, but just imagine. So the refrigerator says to electricity, where do you go to when they pull the plug? And the electricity says, what kind of chutzpah, what kind of nerve is that? What kind of question is that? Where do I go to? You're a little box they just invented 100, 200 years ago. They learned how to confine me into your box to refrigerate food, and now you think you're the center of the universe. I go back to where I always was before you even existed. I go back to my space, beyond space, wherever electricity resides. I'm not locked in your box. So that's exactly the point. We live in this world. We have a certain vision. What do we really know? Ask the most famous, the most successful doctors about medicine. With all that we've achieved with medicine, and we've doubled basically the life expectancy from 42, I think it was 1930 or 20, to now almost double. Double. With all the advancements in medicine, any good doctor will tell you that whatever we've discovered, there's so much more we have no clue about. The brain. The size of what is the brain? The size of a palm? How much do we know about this brain? I'm talking about a brain. We know more about outer space than we know about ourselves. Now, I'm not dismissing what we've achieved. It means to say there are levels, there's layers and layers of mystique and mystery that continues. And that's part of the journey, and it's part of the exhilaration of the journey. It's not meant to dismiss what we know. It's meant to show that whatever we know, the horizon is so much greater. A healthy person never thinks, my box defines reality. That's the first step. Every good, healthy, loving relationship, you'll see that the individuals in the relationship do not think that I define everything. You get rid of that element, and most people get rid of that element, but most people have difficulty getting rid of it because they're insecure. And when you're insecure, you're fighting for your turf. When you fight for your turf, everything's a threat. So you're constantly me. You're hoard. I don't just mean physically. People who are very secure and have that sense of confidence, for them it's very easy to coexist because I'm not less because you're more. You don't have to be wrong for me to be right. Let's put it that way. Now, I know we would eliminate all war and all conflict between nation and nation, between community and community, between man and woman, between man and man, between us and ourselves, if we had that sense of inner connection. So I know we're not there yet, but everyone can understand If you think about it, the contrast. Why are we not there? Not because people are material creatures living in a world constantly fighting for they think that the only way for me to be me is for you to not be, or for me to control you. Healthy people don't think in those terms. Now, how many healthy people you know? That's the question. But healthy people don't think like that. The Kotzker Rebbe once put it very beautifully. He said, about relationships, he said, if I am I because you are you, and you are you because I am I will not be and you will not be. But if I am I because I am I, and you are you because you are you, I will be and you will be. Do you get that? Beyond the poetry, what it means is simply this. If my identity is defined by your identity, in other words, how do I define myself by I'm not you, or I am you, or an extension of you, I will never be. And if you define your identity by my identity, it's the same problem. Whereas if I define my identity by myself, and you are defining your identity by you, then you can have. So if you have a complete you and a complete other, then they can come together, and it's more than the sum of the parts. So it's about combining a sense of self and a sense of deep humility. And they're not a contradiction. Humility is not annihilation of the self. Humility actually is a deeper experience of self because you see beyond your own box. You see a bigger picture. And then yourself becomes absorbed in it. And that's why love is so powerful. So when people say, if I just saw God once, it would be great. That would change everything. I don't know if it would or wouldn't. But one thing is for sure. That would be like saying that you want God in your terms. You want God you want it to look like a table. Who wants a God that's a product of a mathematical equation? And this is what Abraham came to realize in his journey. And this is what's captured here in this little episode that I'm going to now describe. Abraham grew up in a pagan home. His father was actually an idol manufacturer. Idol as an I-D-O-L, not I-D-L-E, idol. And he had an idol for anyone. We have idol manufacturers today as well. What are they called? Snake salesmen, or people selling you anything just that you worship. And Abraham, a wise boy, little child, realized that these idols don't have any power. And he also realized anything man made is only as powerful as man can make it. He began searching for something more eternal, more permanent, more beyond existence, something transcendent. So there's a very fascinating story how he went on this journey. As a little child, he would go out into the meadows and the fields and he would look. He looked up into the heavens. That's the first place we look. He saw the celestial bodies and he saw maybe it's the sun, maybe the moon. But he realized they're just also part of the same world. They're just bigger. They're more distant. They're part of the same physical reality. And he searched and searched and searched. And he finally came to an unbelievable epiphany, and it changed the universe. The world today is different because Abraham came to this realization. He came to realize that his search for God, whatever he called it, the search for this higher reality, cannot be the way that his whole search is based on a wrong premise. He's searching for God as if he knows where God is, and now he has to find God. He came to realize that if God is the whole, and Abraham, is just a part of the whole, how can the part dictate what the whole is like? He came to realize the way to experience the whole is by stopping searching, by letting go, and not being so aggressive, shutting down his tools, and just letting something emerge. He discovered the true love. That love does not come by getting it, but by letting go, and then something emerges. All great things happen that way. That's what he discovered. He says, I'm going to find God. I'll find God. Okay, maybe I'll find him on a mountain. I may find him behind the sun. I may find him in the outer space. But I'll be a God on my terms. I want to discover the whole, not as the part sees it, but as the whole sees it. And a part cannot dictate the whole. It's a simple mathematical equation. And he learned that humility is the strongest power. He let go, and then God emerged from within him. That was what Abraham discovered. All real truth discovered. What is truth? We talk about the word truth. You know that in all fascist and totalitarian regimes, the first thing they do when they come to power, they establish what's called a Bureau of Truth and Information. Whenever you hear there's a Bureau of Truth and Information, you can rest assured it's not true and not information. Because why do you need a Bureau of Truth and Information? Because they want to control minds. They want to control the newspapers, the radio waves, the airwaves. Because if you control minds, look what the Soviet Union was able to pull off. My father was born there. They created a whole reality of their own. It was radio-free Europe, some people say, that opened up. Because Russia, the former Soviet Union, the only thing you knew was what they told you. I remember someone coming back from Moscow. This is 1978, I think. They came back with an English printed newspaper in Moscow. I'm not exaggerating. The cover story was a picture of a ghost town, like with one light bulb about to burn out. And the top headline was that New York City, the last residents of New York City have just moved out of this town. New York City. This New York. Now, when you don't have any other newspaper, and you have nothing to compare it to because there's no internet and there's no one, that's what people believed. And I remember when I had cousins, they came out of the Soviet Union in the late 70s, 80s. They said to me, does New York City still exist? They were told New York became completely overridden with crime, and there's no one living there anymore. There's one little light bulb burning. What do you think? This is called propaganda. It's hard for us to imagine. Even though some people say the United States is also a conspiracy like this, but my point is, why do they control truth and information? Because they want to control minds. Truth is not ownable. I think there's a line of the the first inventors of the internet. Information wants to be free, is the big expression. And actually it applies into copyright law. If you're familiar with copyright law, the truth is knowledge is not copyrightable. That's why copyrights are private copyrights are 50 years old, and corporate copyrights are something like 70 years old or 80. There's no copyright, for example, on Shakespeare. You can print a new edition with a typeface and own the patent of the typeface, but you cannot copyright knowledge. The only reason copyrights exist is to keep the incentive for authors to want to create, but it only lasts as long as they're them and maybe a generation later. Copyright law. So even in our commercial America, copyright law, everyone understands that knowledge and truth is not ownable, really. Because why? Because truth is in here. A good teacher cannot give you truth. They help you discover the inner truth that you... Resonance, it's called. Resonating. The joke, another stereotypical joke, a Woody Allen one. Where the guy comes to the rabbi and says, Rabbi, I hear that the Torah has the answer to all secrets of life. Yes. Can you teach it to me? Of course. How much will it cost? How can I charge you? God didn't charge Moses. Moses didn't charge the people. Okay, how could I charge you for the truth? So he's doubly impressed. He's getting the truth, plus for free. Wow. They sit down, they start reading the Torah, it's all in Hebrew. So the rabbi says, well, Hebrew lessons will be $10,000. This is Woody Allen's way of, it's always the end is always that clincher. Now, I only use the joke not because I agree, but truth is not not be owned, just like love can't be owned. It emerges, and that's what Abraham came to discover. That any truth that's sold to you by somebody, especially if they're charging a good number, is usually not true. Truth, love, is not just a cliche that it can be bought. God, all the transcendence I described are forces within us that need to be accessed. And the tool for it is the opposite of all our tools. Every tool we use is go get it. Do this, do that. We go to school and we're taught how to write a business letter, how to write a proposal, how to ask for this, how to write a grant, whatever it is. And here's something, the real things in life, no proposal will help you, no grant writing, because you're not dealing with something with a commodity. You're not dealing with something that can be bought. You're dealing with something that's there already that needs to emerge. So yes, you can write a nice love letter and draw someone in, but love is not based on the letter. The letter is because it's eliciting feelings that are deeper feelings. So what's the verse that we're talking about here? Moses, who, as the Bible describes, is the only person that ever spoke to God face to face, like a person speaks to their friend. That's the description. Moses, at some point in this week's chapter, is it's almost like an intimate communication between Moses and God. I don't know if you'll find anywhere in literature a more intimate description of a human being speaking to God. So it's an interesting read. So Moses is up on the mountain speaking to God. And at some point, because their relationship was so close, Moses says to God in a very loving way, like you'd say to a lover, show me your face. He says, show me yourself. I want to see you. And God responds, no person can see me and live. Famous line. But then the verse continues and says that God says to him, but you know what? I'll show you my back, not my face. But my face I will not show you. That's literal verse that I just read. So there are volumes written on this few verses. What's this exchange about? And you'll see in a moment that it carries such profound insights and lessons in our lives right now and here. Right here and now. First, a few questions. Moses was a smart man, but he didn't understand that you can't see God and live. To see God, as some of the philosophers put it, if you were me, if you knew me, you would be me. When it comes to God, if you are God, if you know God, you are God. You can't be yourself and be God at the same time. It's very separate reality. And then why does God repeat to him, like rubbing it in, saying, I'll show you my back, but my face I will not show you. He already told him, you can't see my face. So here is a profound interpretation that is written by a great scholar. It's called the Ponim Yafis. And he says the following. He says the way it's meant to be read is that God is saying to Moses, look, I'll show you my back and my face, but my face you'll see by not looking. So let me explain what this is. What means the face of God? Can you see your own inner essence? Can you see your own inner reality? By definition, it's not seeable. Because eyes are limited containers. And if you could see something, it means it's on your terms and it's not a real experience. That's why we can't see love, by the way. Because love is not a tangible reality. As I mentioned before, when it comes to true experiences, words are not enough. Why can't you not describe the innermost feelings you have within you? Because words are limited containers. So are eyes. Eyes cannot see subatomic particles, and they definitely can't see a soul. Not because a soul is limited, it's because our eyes are limited. Someone will say, I can't see love. So you say, no, you know what? To experience love, you need a different type of tool. So basically, what Moses wanted to have was an experience of the essence of it all, wants to see it. And God basically says to him, if you want to see it, the only way you can see it is by not looking. Real things in life, if you want to have them, I mentioned before, what does it feel like to be alive? You can't find words for it, you're not going to find tools for it. I mentioned before, right now, what's your left leg doing? So until I mentioned that, you have no idea what your left leg was doing. Now you think about it and you say, now the left leg was there. The sensation of knowing what it's doing is already a tangible and a limited experience. The deepest experience in the zone is when you're completely there and you're not even aware of it. I know it turns over something. People say, what do you mean? I want to be aware of it. Isn't awareness like a good thing? Isn't consciousness a good thing? Well, from a mystical point of view, consciousness is actually a lower state than lack of consciousness. Now, I don't mean lack of consciousness that someone who's so blind that they're not aware. I'm talking about you're so immersed in it that it's not defined by your awareness. And that's what Moses wanted. He wanted to fuse completely to what is real in this world. And the truth is, what is real in this world is not something you can experience directly. You can only experience it indirectly. I'm going to use an example, maybe a little, irreverent example, if I could call it that. I remember, I think last year, I mentioned LSD before. So LSD was discovered by Dr. Hoffman. What was his first name? Albert, I think. He worked in a pharmaceutical lab in Switzerland in the 40s and 50s. And actually what he was looking for was to create a chemical that would simulate madness. That's what he was looking for. He wanted to provide the world of psychiatry with something that can simulate what was called madness. So that way maybe doctors could figure out what's going on in a mad mind. They called it madness then. Today we have other names for it. A mind that is mentally disturbed. So he was looking for a drug of that form. Now, he was working in a lab in Switzerland, I think with Sandoz, or one of the big pharmaceutical firms. And obviously, wasn't so simple because who do you experiment on? This was not a drug you can just experiment on rodents or others, because that wouldn't help. If they went mad, it wouldn't help us. So he had to experiment on a human being, so he had no one else but himself. Now he knew the risk, because he could end up killing himself, he could end up actually creating something that is irreversible. So what he set up was, in his lab, he set up tape recorders and had notepads everywhere, both in his lab and at home, because as he was trying these chemicals on himself, should anything happen to him, he wanted to make sure everything was recorded for posterity, for documented. And he would ingest or inject himself with all these different mix combinations. This you could check out. This is not a myth. It's exactly what happened. Anyway, what he writes is in his papers is that one day in the morning around 11 o'clock he tried this new concoction, and then he went home for lunch. So he went on a bicycle. And he writes that he was riding on a bicycle from his office, from his lab to his home. And he's riding down it was like a place where it was a beautiful place with hedges and like one of these like gardens that he was riding through. And suddenly he felt that the bicycle was beginning to like lift up. And he said the hedges began to vibrate. And the sky began to turn colors. And he thought he was going mad. He finally got home, he put the tape recorder on, and he started blabbing whatever was going on. He thought, this is it. Well, anyway, he had the first chemical psychedelic experience. It was the first LSD trip. That's what he discovered. And he passed out, but then he came to, and he came back. And he started documenting this was LSD. The LSD began to then be experimented upon in students in Berkeley. Volunteered, till 1966 it was legal in the United States. And there was a whole debate that broke out that you may be familiar with, Aldous Huxley and Timothy Leary, when people started getting a hold of this drug and the psychedelic experiences it elicited. So Aldous Huxley, who was an elitist, said this should only be reserved for people who are, worthy of it. And Timothy Leary, who was the Harvard psychologist that made LSD into a whole movement, said no, it's for everybody, for the mainstream, for the masses. Some suggested that they should pump it into the water mains of Washington and Moscow, and that would solve the Cold War, whatever it is. But that's all some trivia. I know I'm pretty familiar with this because I'm very intrigued by it. But here's the interesting thing that Hoffman wrote from his experience. And I know you may say what's relevant here, you'll see in a moment. He came up with a theory on consciousness. When I read for the first time, I was like blown away. Not because of the theory, because it's literally almost word for word from Kabbalistic texts that were written hundreds of years ago. And so I was amazed by the parallel. He basically, and I'm using my own analogy here, he said what he experienced when he went on the drug was, what is really consciousness? What's the definition of consciousness? The conscious mind. When we're aware of something, we're consciously aware. So most of us think of consciousness as an enlightened state, and lack of consciousness as a darkened state. He said it's not the case at all. The human mind has chemicals that create compartments. And when an idea falls into your mind, you begin to use that idea and develop the idea. But let's say the compartment would break down, and suddenly you had a flow from the collective consciousness, a flow of ideas that would completely overwhelm you. You would go mad. Which is why there's a very thin line between madness and genius. You find people who are geniuses, and one drop they become mad, one drop they're geniuses. Because they're a place where the channels are very much open from that collective unconscious, and therefore they have that element of genius. If it's too open, they cannot contain it. If it's too closed, then it's a regular mind. So the analogy I would give is, maybe his analogy, I don't remember now, was think of like a faucet of water that regulates the flow. So you have water in a reservoir or in a water main, so there's a lot of water there, and if the faucet was not regulating it, it would basically drown and flood, and it would not be able to be contained. So consciousness is actually just the tip of the iceberg of a whole state of intelligence that is invisible to the eye. This is essentially what he wrote. In Eitz Chaim, which is a book, one of the great Kabbalistic works of the Arizal, written 500 years ago, it's exactly how it describes the mind. That the mind that we know, the things we're conscious of, is one little speck. Like think of the tip of an iceberg of a far bigger reality. So when, you know why the Doors, the band called the Doors, why do they call themselves the Doors? It's based on William Blake's poem, where he says that when I cleanse the doors of perception, I reach a place which is one, the light, infinity itself, something like that. So essentially the approach is, and this is, that our perception is very limited. We only see the very, very outer surface of things. And beneath the curtain, behind the curtain, and beneath the surface lies a whole dimension. The whole psychedelic movement was intent on trying to go there. For the record, let me just say this full disclosure, I never tried any psychedelics or anything, but I've studied this and I'm completely intrigued by it through Judaism and Torah. This talks very much about this, how you open up the channels from an unconscious state to a conscious. Because that's really the secret of finding the deeper sense, a deeper sense of yourself. So this statement that God tells Moses, he's basically telling him, you want to access that part? You can only access it by not entering with all of you. You have to put away your self on the side, and then that part will emerge. Because you cannot experience the unconscious the same way you experience the conscious. So this whole idea that I just described, that is a very secular psychological concept, is literally hinted to in this verse here. Moses wants to see that dimension of reality, and God says no one can see that and live, but you can go there if you shed those regular tools that you have. You ever hear the city called Chelm? Chelm is a city that captures this idea very well. Chelm was a town in Poland that fools lived there. So there's a whole book, a whole folklore that was developed of the fools of Chelm. So there's the story about the farmer of Chelm who had this farm, and it was Chelm was a small town, so you can imagine the farm was even smaller. But he was very proud of it because it was his farm that he inherited from his parents and grandparents. And he knew every inch of soil. One day, he gets a visitor, a distant cousin from a big town, big city farmer in the United States. Comes to see him. So he gives him his royal tour of his little town, little farm in Chelm. They sit down to dinner, and the small farm, the Chelm farmer says to his cousin, "So what do you think about my farm?" And he says, "It's very nice and cute, but it's so tiny." She's taken aback and insulted. He says, "Well, how big is your farm back in Texas?" He says, "My farm?" How is he going to describe to a little town farmer who never saw a big city what? So he says, gives him a point of reference. My farm? It takes me all day to travel with my tractor from one end of the farm to the next. That's what he answers. So the Chelm farmer suddenly feels compassion, empathy for his friend, and says to him, for his cousin, he says, "Don't feel bad. I once had a tractor like that too." Understand? I once had a tractor like that too. Why? Because the Chelm farmer couldn't even fathom that size farm. So if someone says it takes all day to travel from here to there, he was sure, because he had a little shmata jalopy that took him all day to crank up to get from here to here. He never thought that the farm is that large. It's the vehicle is the problem. He has an old vehicle. We all have our farms. Nobody, people say, are you objective or subjective? Are you narrow-minded, closed-minded, or open-minded? The answer is, we're as open-minded as our perspectives are. We all have certain closed-minded elements. We all have our farm. Things we are familiar with, things that we're comfortable with. And someone says to you, there's a farm, something down there's a farm that's that large. Most of us, because we can't fathom it, what we say is, oh, that means maybe the vehicle, we have to fit it into our terms. True knowledge is the ability to open your mind. Einstein, when they asked him how he came up with these completely revolutionary, they say once in a millennium ideas like that. Some say once in history. And he was a clerk. But he was a scientific mind. He said because he did not think with what he learned, he did not allow what he had learned in school to affect him. He dreamt. It was all imagination. He thought completely out of the box, as they say. Everybody likes the word out of the box, but how many people really think out of the box? Remember, it's your box that's thinking. So how could your box think out of the box? It's not so simple. Einstein, other scientists have put it this way: you cannot change a system from within a system. So you almost need some type of radical shift that takes you elsewhere. That's why you'll find a lot of great inventions in history came through deep trauma and pain. Not just someone came as sitting around, twiddling their thumbs and ruminating. It came often with a deep traumatic experience that jolted them in a completely different place, so they thought differently. Almost across the board. Look at Steve Jobs. Whether you consider him a genius or not, but definitely some things he did have a certain genius element. You read Isaacson's book on Jobs. You see, his greatest things came after he was kicked out of Apple, the company he founded, and it all came from type of like things that were not regular innovative experiences. It came from a lot of pain, basically. Now, I'm not suggesting that every invention came through pain, but you probably in most cases you'll find something that was not regular. Because you need to be out of the system to look at the system in a different way. Which is one of the reasons why most of us, when we're getting into trouble in our relationships and so on, we can't really get out of it because we're part of the problem. There's an expression in the Talmud that says, a person in fetters cannot release themselves. Our own bias and subjectivity doesn't allow us to see ourselves in objective light, which is why we need objective advice, someone that can look at it from outside. And many times we don't even listen because we just can't see it that way. Our blind spots are so powerful that they make you think you don't have blind spots, or you minimize your blind spots. So we all have a farm. We all have our place. And the challenge, and that's when God was telling Moses, you want to see me and live, you got to get out of your interests. The more you want it, the less you're going to have it. And the less you want it, the more you're going to have it. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but some truths, that's how they come to you. There's an expression in the Talmud that says, in Medrash, that someone who pursues honor, the honor will elude them. And someone who runs away from honor, the honor will pursue them. So some people say, okay, I'll run away from honor and I'll look over my shoulder to make sure it's running after me. That's not what we're talking about. People, for example, let's talk about a good reputation. Can you buy a good reputation? Can you inherit it? No. It comes as a result of enough people trusting you repeatedly. It's not something you can earn. You earn it only through a process, and then it emerges. You can't say, here is how you're going to buy a good reputation. I know today we could hire somebody that can go to your Wikipedia page or do a Google search and get rid of the first page, shouldn't have anything negative. But that's maneuvering. A good reputation is something that is in that category. You run after it, that's not going to help your reputation. I'm talking about a real good reputation. I'm not talking about a con artist or somebody that's faking it. Someone that really is trusted by people. So the real truths in life, going back to all those things, are all in one line where God says to Moses, you'll never get them if you try to pursue them. John Stuart Mill, I quoted him last week. He said that happiness, if you look around, who people that are happy are never the people that pursue happiness. They pursue something that's not about them, being kind to others, something for humanity, something for a higher cause, and the end result is that they become happy. Those that pursue happiness, find me someone that has pursued happiness and found it. Because we pursue it with our tools. And that you may get instant gratification. You may get some thrills. You may get some good feelings for a while. But I'm talking about a permanent type of happiness. Those of us that have been blessed with children can identify with this. I hesitate to mention this because every time I mention children, people call me, what about people who don't have children? I don't want to have a reverse discrimination, not to mention something that's so beautiful, but everyone should be blessed with children. Children, it's hard to describe until you have your children, until you walk them actually down the aisle, which I had the privilege of doing twice with my son and my daughter. You cannot really describe, it's not a nachas, it's not a joy that you can earn, or you can buy. It's a result of the years and years of doing the little things of nurturing and educating your children. And then one day, your merit, and it's also beyond your effort. Like, any parent suddenly sees a newborn child. What did you do to earn this child? Did you work on it? And the most beautiful thing in life, having a child, is something you can't go to college for. You don't get training, and it's all on the job. And it's the greatest blessing. It's eternity. The eternity of your life, to see your children, and then see your children have children. There's almost nothing greater in life. Maybe nothing greater. And it's something you cannot buy. It's something, the only way to do it is by just doing the right things, and then suddenly it emerges, something great happens. And you'll see in life, anything great comes exactly that way. Which of course throws everything for a loop, because we are busy so much with our lives, aggressively pursuing all kinds of things. When in truth, the biggest things in life cannot be aggressively pursued. There's nothing you can do to get them except letting go. So I'm not suggesting, obviously, when it comes to business and commerce and negotiations, obviously that's a world that's defined by being a go-getter and getting it and doing something and so on. So fine, that's good, but that's relegated to a very much survival part of our lives, living in this world, managing, maneuvering, whatever you want to call it. But the real part of our lives is often completely obfuscated due to the rat race that we're a part of, and we don't realize that you have to have completely a different set of tools when it comes to finding the eternal needs that we have, the transcendent ones. And there it has to be completely by shedding layers. You know, in Judaism there's a concept of Shabbos, right? 6 days of the week we work, and 1 day we rest. I just want to give you a thought on this that many people don't even realize. So many people say, okay, listen, I'm not Shabbos observant, it's for religious, you know, I can't really not work and so on, whatever, or I can't follow every detail. Fine, everybody in their own level. I want to just talk about the concept. What is the concept? Think about it for a moment. I mentioned before, imagine you shut down all your 5 senses. Your sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell. What are you left with? You're left with the real you. That's not stimulated or hyperstimulated by all the sensory forces around you. Shabbos is meant to be a day like that. 6 days of the week you immerse in the material world. You work, you shop, you do whatever you have to do to live and survive. And 1 day of the week you focus exclusively on, you know what? On your soul, not on your body. How do you focus on your soul? By shutting off as many extraterrestrial, extracurricular sounds as possible. The Zohar has a very beautiful statement. It says that every one of us has a unique melody that our soul sings. Have you heard your soul's melody recently? Why not? Because there's so many outside noises. You know, when you hear a lot of rush hour traffic, you can't hear subtle strings. We are so stimulated by so much around us that our own inner voice does not emerge. Shabbos is a day where you shut down as much as possible material immersion to allow the soul to emerge. And the soul is like a child. It needs attention, and you have to shut off other sounds and other arguments and other noises for it to arise. It's called the Kol Dmamadaka in Hebrew, the gentle, the delicate, subtle voice. And that can only emerge when you shut other things down. You can't pull it out of you. You shut things down and then things emerge. Try it out. Shut down as much as possible and you'll see what starts emerging from within you. And that's where true love thrives. You know, the little interactions we have with our children. They may not be dramatic, there's no fireworks. It's small little things. You get yourself out of the way and suddenly you see a child has such magic. You try to impose yourself on the child and you basically force your child to fit into your farm, your box. Everything in life is that way. And the key is to recognize that the real things in life require this not looking. Don't look, and then it emerges. You look for it, you try to seek it, then you don't get it. You get limited version perhaps. The greatest things emerge. You know, and look how life emerges. 9 months of pregnancy, you plant a seed in the ground, you water it, you do everything, something emerges. These things, you cannot force them. They come through a result of life experiences. So that's a song inside of us. Thoreau writes that he says it about men, I guess maybe men more than women. Most men lead lives of quiet desperation. But then there's the second half. And they die with their song still inside them. Pretty sad, tragic to feel that way, that some of us may die with our song still inside us. I mentioned a number of times, one of the greatest compliments I ever received was a number of years ago, before Rosh Hashanah. I got a letter from a woman, an email. She writes she lived in Austin, Texas, and then moved to Seattle. That she had a miserable year, terrible year, went through an ugly divorce, very difficult year. She said one of the redeeming factors was your weekly emails that would come Thursday night or Friday morning, and I just would wait for them. It was like a ray of light and then just this dark hell. And she said, I just want to thank you. Now she concludes her note by saying that she was a sculptor by profession. And she said, Michelangelo once said when they asked him, how do you sculpt those beautiful angels in the marble? And his answer was, I see the angel trapped in the marble, and I carved and set her free. So she writes to me, so thank you for setting my angel free. It's an excellent metaphor, because it means that no one has to give you your angel, your song, your truth, your voice, your God. It's all inside of you. However, it's sometimes trapped in marble, or in concrete, or in other substances, and all the stuff that we're involved in. And your angel gets buried, but it's waiting for you to release it. And to release it, sometimes you're not going to do anything to force it out. You can't get a child that's frightened to come out of under the table by schlepping it out, by pulling the child out. You have to create an environment that's safe, and then the child emerges. Same thing here. You have to carve, get rid of the distractions, and create a loving and trusting and warm and secure, safe environment, and then the angel emerges. That's how it works. That's how love works. You can't force certain things. And that's what God was telling Moses. My back you can see, but if you want to see my face, you want to see the real me, the inner me, you have to stop being so aggressive. Don't try to find it. You pull back, and then it will emerge. So it's very counterintuitive that by not looking, you see the deepest things. I hope everybody can find ways to apply this in your personal lives, whether it's in love or it's in our own search for our inner selves. It forces us to go against the grain of what we're trained to do, which is always, let me do this, cause and effect, action, reaction. Here it's the opposite. The lack of action is what creates a much deeper reaction. But it's not, remember, lack of action doesn't mean lack of action. It means it's an action instead of going after it, it's pulling back. So there's certain doors we open by pushing forward, and there's other doors we open by pulling back. And the pulling back elicits certain forces that are far, far deeper than anything you can get by pushing. So, my friends, I hope this, as I said, can be useful to find the angels all within yourselves. The music that's inside of you, it's waiting to be released. And I feel honored to be able to be part of the carvers that help carve the concrete or the marble and try to get that free. But it's all within our own reach. And just a matter of us doing that work and finding good objective friends who can help us sometimes kick us in the pants or do what it takes to, in a trusting and kind way, to help us get out of our own way so we can really get out of the box and the farm that so confines us. So as always, please stay in touch. It's an honor and pleasure to continue this class every week. We'll be continuing next Wednesday. I've been doing this now for 32 years, wow, a lifetime. And it's been an honor to meet so many beautiful, wonderful people. And I see someone that I know back from how many years ago. It just reminds me that some things you just continue doing it. It has a certain perpetual. I remember Alyana at her wedding, and David, we were under the chuppah. And now you have children merging into adolescence. And soon you'll be a grandma. Time flies. And please stay in touch. Leave us your emails. Anything way we can help, I could help. Please let me know, as well as Velvel. And Philip will be giving his class tomorrow night. Philip Namworth, who's also been giving, a student of mine and colleague who's been giving class for many years. And until next week, stay warm. And here in New York, we're welcoming yet another white angels will be descending. And if it wasn't for our dirty feet, it would be beautiful to watch as they blanket this city. Okay, everyone have a very good week. Thank you.